What's a creepy thing that happened to you but at the time you didn't realize it was creepy until after? Part 1. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. My mom and sister got home from being out late, around 1 a.m., and me and my mom got into an argument about something so stupid that I can't even remember what it was about. Like most teenage arguments, so I went outside to cool off and to prevent saying something I would regret. It's worth mentioning that our house was surrounded by dense forest that lead to a road on the other side of said forest. We had a farm-type fence, white with electric wires, because at the time we had cows around the property. So I'm at the side of the house, and at the back of the house we had a pool and the pool house that had the pump and stuff. It's raining lightly, which I don't mind because I love rain. My sister is calling my name from the front door asking me to come back inside before I get too cold. I didn't feel like talking to her, so I just stayed there, kind of just standing there thinking. She stops talking and all of a sudden I hear heavy footsteps crunching on the rocks by the pool. Then click click, I turn the corner and see our pool house lights turning on and off, and the clicking is the light switch on the front of the little pool house. All I can see is the light turning off and on, and all I can hear is the clicking of the old rusty light switch. At this point I'm thinking it's probably just my sister who probably just went around back to look for me. So I go to walk and tell her I'm fine. I take 2 steps and suddenly think, I've seen this movie. Girl fights with her mom, goes out to smoke and then hears noise, then gets killed by axe murderer. So I haul it back to the front door and run back inside. Freaked out, but eventually forgetting all about it until a few days pass when I ask my sister why she was flicking the lights on and off, and when she said she didn't, I was mortified. I still don't know who it was, but I do know it wasn't anyone with good intentions, and none of my neighbors lived that close to us. Opening parenthesis. I was a troubled kid, and I skipped high school a lot. I had friends who lived and went to school near where my dad lived, so I would often take public transportation or ride my bike to visit them during lunch or after school, and my parents had no idea, for a while, anyway. One day, as I was riding my bike along a busy road, a man pulled up and asked if I needed a ride. I kept refusing, but he insisted, and he somehow reassured me that everything would be okay, and I stupidly believed him. I got in the car. He threw my bike in the trunk, and he told me his name was Michael. He was approximately in his mid-30s, and he had dark brown hair, and he looked quite a bit like Michael Landon, but was definitely not Michael Landon. He lived in the area, and he told me he wasn't in a rush and drove me to my friend's high school so I could meet them for lunch, all without incident. Internet access wasn't a thing, so I spent my free time riding my bike and taking walks much of the time. For some reason, I kept meeting him while I was on my way somewhere, and he would stop and give me a ride each time. He was friendly, talkative, and polite, and he delivered me to each destination without any extra nonsense. I liked him well enough and enjoyed spending a few minutes with him from time to time. After a while though, it became clear that he had other motives, but I was completely oblivious. I was always insecure about my appearance, but he complimented me and asked to take pictures of me. I said that would be fine, and I just over the moon that someone finally found me pretty. He didn't take extra time to discuss this, and he seemed laid back and dropped me off as normal. The next time he picked me up, he asked me about posing for pictures again, and I happily agreed, but this time, he asked me if I would be fine with being photographed in a bikini. Other than tight jeans, I was brought up to dress very modestly and completely lacked confidence anyway, so I was completely uncomfortable with this and told him so. He pushed the issue for another request or two and dropped the subject when I refused again. The next time he picked me up, he brought up the photos again, and when I agreed to clothed pictures, he asked me about bathing suit pictures again, but I refused, no matter how hard he tried to push, and I'm sure my discomfort was palpable. He dropped me off at my destination, and that was the last time he gave me a ride. I saw him a year or two later, and we exchanged greetings in passing, but we never crossed paths again. I was stupid to get in his car, but I think that my nervous denials to his requests might have saved me from something horrible. Now, as an adult and a parent, I've thought about the whole situation, and I realize how lucky I am and how wrong it could have ended up for me, and it never fails to disturb me. 3rd grade. I got to go into the local college hockey team locker room and get a notebook signed by every player and coach on the team. I brought the notebook into show and tell the next day. After I was done presenting, my teacher's comment was, "Boy, what I would do to get into the locker room with the hockey team." Comment struck a chord with me because I didn't understand it. Years later, we now laugh, cringe at our creepy 3rd grade teacher's sexual fantasy. A few years ago, this man in a fisherman's coat, with the hood pulled up, turns up at the front door. He's old with a long, scraggly beard and in his left hand, a tent peg. He asked if he could use our phone to call a taxi. I gave him the phone, he called the taxi and then walked off. I told my parents about it. They didn't seem too happy about me answering the door to strange old men with tent pegs in their hands. It was summer of 7th grade, going into 8th. Was 13, and I agreed to go help my mom at her work. She works as a service lady in a hotel. Every weekend and maybe some weekdays, it varied on tenants. Plus I got some money, from my mom, so it was pretty sweet going to work with her. Well, there were these tenants, a grandmother, 80-ish, and her grandson, about 17 or 18, who were very sketchy and very creepy, especially the grandson. Well, at least to me he seemed creepy. So I went to the laundry room to get some clean white sheets for some rooms upstairs, and I had like 6 sets, so I had my hands full and could barely see in front of me. So as I was turning a corner, I saw that he was at the bottom of the stairs and he offered to help, but I kindly declined his offer, and after letting me pass through I noticed him staring at my back, so I was very creeped out and started getting nervous and going faster up the stairs. But then he asked me my age, to which I lied and said I was 12, and of course he did not believe me. Then he asked me if I was allowed to date and if I had a boyfriend, and I said no to both. After some awkward silence, I run up the stairs, and I was so grateful that I immediately found my mom in a nearby room because he followed me. My mom saw that I was terrified and told me to go inside the room and lock it. I peek and saw that he was talking to my mom, trying to ask her if she had seen me. He didn't know she was my mom, but then out of nowhere, he took out his hunting knife, and I was about to cry because I was so scared. My mom was fine. Some other tenants saw this taking place and intervened, threatened to call 911. Since he wasn't even supposed to be upstairs, for his room was on the first floor. However, that didn't stop him from harassing my mom's coworker, whom also brought their daughters to work. Turns out that when one of the daughters asked them to step out of the room so she could clean, the guy came in from behind her while she was scrubbing a bathtub and groped her. After that, we told the manager, and when the tenants refused to leave, we called 911. This may not count cause I knew it was creepy AF at the moment, but didn't know the full effects of it until 2 years later. On a school trip to Africa, when me and some kids fell sick at this restaurant, so one of the chaperones took like 5 of us back to the hotel on bus. After the chaperone being in the bathroom suspiciously long with my roommate while he showered, I was dozing in and out of sleep on my bed. When he came out, he told me to take my pants off so I wouldn't get hot at night. I said okay and waited. And he just stayed watching. So I did and went to sleep. 2 years later, my best friend calls me and says to check the FBI webpage. And bam, there's his picture with wanted captions all around. Turns out he molested over 80 kids in various school trips, and I was one of the unlucky ones. So yeah, that was super creepy even before I found out the full extent. Obviously even more creepy afterwards. There's more details if anyone's interested, and I also did an interview with a newspaper which explains the whole thing. So not as bad as other ones here, but a few weeks ago we had a sub in my geometry class. He just kinda was telling a story for no reason for the beginning of class, which was whatever better than doing work right. Then he asked for a volunteer, and I was like, sure, I'm bored. So I go up there and he asks me in front of the entire class if I have a boyfriend. I just uncomfortably go no, and then he grabs my hand and starts to slowly swing it back and forth and told me to pretend he was my boyfriend and asked me how it felt. I didn't even know what to do at that point. It was weird, but something in me just thought it wasn't weird and I was just being oversensitive. He wouldn't let me go until I said it felt wonderful. I didn't even think of it until a few weeks ago, and maybe it's an overreaction, but felt pretty creepy in retrospect. When I was a teenager, I participated in a youth group that was led by people in their early 20s. A couple of the adults started relationships with a couple of the participants. Now that I'm well past either of those age brackets, I can see just how inappropriate those adults were being, and just how easily this could have been prevented by having someone who was slightly older and more mature involved with the group. When I was about in 4th grade, my whole family, including grandparents, decided to take a trip to Yellowstone for a few weeks in July. We all drove, so we all stopped at this Carl's Jr. in Idaho for lunch on the first day. It was one of those truck stop combinations with the restaurant and gas station combined. They had this really cool arcade little alcove room that I decided to go into, with permission from my parents, because they weren't far at all. Well, I started to play the games, didn't even notice there was a guy in there standing against one of the pinball machines. Also, should mention right here, I'm a girl, and I was pretty small at that age. He walks up behind me and tries talking to me about the logistics of the game I was playing, and all this complicated shit, which at the time I thought was cool. Then he started to wrap his arms around my back to grab my hands on the controls, and I jerked away super fast, and ran back into the dining area. I ran right over to my dad, who is a big man, much bigger than the guy that was trying shit, and told him what happened. My dad walked over calmly into the arcade, and maybe 30 seconds later, we all see the guy walking out really fast, a panicked look on his face. My dad never said anything about what he said to the guy, and I still wonder what he said. I may ask him when I get a chance, because we never saw that guy for the rest of the hour or two we were there. Thank goodness for protective dads. I was very young, in a pool equipment store with my mom. This man came up and started talking to me. This is strange, but I just remember him holding his hand just above my head and asking me to do a twirl, which I did, in childish glee. Then he went over to my mom, who was speaking with the cashier, and whispered something in her ear. She got super mad and walked me out of the store without buying anything. She was angry with me all night, and when my dad came home she spoke to him, and then he came over and yelled at me for talking to strangers. Turns out the man in the store said something along the lines of, "I'd like to take your daughter into a bathroom stall," or some dirty ass shit. Way too young to understand what was going on, but I gotta talk about rape that night. A man asked me if I wanted to test some perfume samples. He was wearing a torn-up polo with no brands, nothing to signify he was working for a business, and was lurking outside next to an alley. There were a lot of homeless people in the area, so I politely declined and kept walking. As I continued walking home, I realized the whole situation just screamed chloroform. "Hi little girl, come sniff some samples in this dark alley." Quote, "When I was 12 I went to my godmother's 50th birthday party. It was mainly people her age, but there were also some kids who came along, so most of us played some games, etc. I felt quite tired earlier than normal, so went to bed. I was staying in a spare bedroom alone. I put on my PJs, got into bed, and fell asleep straight away. When I woke up in the morning I was on the floor, naked and drenched in sweat, with absolutely no recollection of how that happened. Decided at the time it was probably nothing. Last year I was talking to my godmother's daughter, godsister, IDK, and told her about what happened that night, and she was horrified, which I wasn't expecting. It turned out one of the partygoers was later convicted of child molestation. We have no idea if anything happened to me, but it creeps me out nowadays. When I was 9 or 10 years old, I had a teacher that would play an improv type game with us where he would make up a silly scenario and get some kids to act it out. Anyway, one time he asked a girl to pretend you're buying a G-string for your boyfriend. Half the class didn't know what a G-string was, so he then proceeded to describe one to us. I didn't think much of it at the time, but in hindsight it was fucking creepy. When I was 7 years old, the local neighborhood ice cream man always gave me free ice cream. I never second-guessed why he always gave me free ice cream. One day an older kid had asked him why was I always getting free ice cream. He responded, "She's really good looking." I overheard, and that really freaked me out. It wasn't a, "Oh, she's a cute little kid." It was a creepy tone. My 7-year-old self became so uncomfortable, and after that day I never went back for ice cream. I've yet to tell anyone that story. As a 25-year-old today and looking back, I find that really disgusting and disturbing. I feel too embarrassed to ever bring it up. When I was around 7 or 8 in my public elementary school, I remember playing in the tall grass with my friend at aftercare. There was this very big patch of field on the playground that stretched about a mile away from a quiet road, and there were tall trees and bushes surrounding the fence that marked our boundaries. Whilst playing, I looked over and noticed 2 grown men taking photos of us. Confused, I pointed at them and made my friend look over, and they immediately ran off, as if panicked. My friend thought it was flattering for some reason, but I was really confused. Thinking about how my dad always warned me of strangers, I dragged my friend over to the teachers and telling them about it. They conducted a massive search all around the perimeter of the school, but they couldn't find the 2 men. I remember a massive crowd gathering around me and my friend as they asked us about it. I didn't think it was too weird until 2 years after. When I was 14, I went to a friend's birthday party at his martial arts studio. It was being hosted by his instructor, who was weird. Had us do activities that required us to change, then would hang around us as we changed, and was super hands-on with his instructions. I knew it was weird as a 14-year-old, but I just figured that's how they did things. 2 years later, he was arrested after it came out he had a long-term relationship with a male student that started when he was a teenager. Not very often you can look back at a specific moment and say, I narrowly avoided getting molested that day, but there you go.